Thank
Good,
you.
good evening. Today is September 29th. This is the 29th hearing of the special permit application for 582 Blue Hill Avenue. My name is Jeffrey Mullen. I'm the acting chair of the hearing, and with me is Giselle Joffer and Frank O'Brien, members of the board. Welcome. Tonight, we've got an agenda, and I want to speak to some documents we've received. We're zeroing in on the close of the receipt of testimony, and tonight my notes indicate that we're going to hear, or we'll receive confirmation of the view from the Milton Fire Department. I want to raise an issue about the condition of the manhole and the invert at the bottom of Meeting House Hill Lane. We talk about the auto turn analysis that with respect to the movement of a garbage vehicle on the site. I'd like to hear from Mr. Schumer, Mr. Hill, and the nature of closing statements on the application, and then we'll talk about the conditions and the waivers that the applicant has sought, and then we'll make a decision about how to proceed with this hearing going forward. Do the members have any comments or questions on that agenda?
No comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Since the last time we've met, we received a number of communications from Mr. Schumer. One included a memo from MDM, the transportation expert, which has been retained by the applicant with respect to the auto turn analysis on the site. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Schumer and or Mr. Michaud on that, mostly because that was a specific request from a member of the community. We received a memo through Mr. Schumer from Mr. Burke about the extent of the detention pond. I think the memo speaks for itself. It's been entered into the record. I don't know that we need specific testimony on that. We received comments from the Milton Fire Department that have been entered into the record and to which we should refer to during this hearing, and I will when we open the testimony. We received an email from the head of school at Adelphi Academy expressing concerns about the application in specific broad terms about what the school is concerned about as a direct abutter. That's the first communication that I'm aware of from Adelphi directly, although I know that the head of school was at least one of the walkthroughs, and Adelphi has been referred to several times in the application. We received the board received for the first time a list of conditions that have been proposed by the applicant, which I think might have been around for a little while, and I believe they've been placed on the website. So we have that, and then we have a long letter from Mr. Hill. Thank you, Mr. Hill, with respect to proposed findings and proposed conditions, which is quite comprehensive and will speak for itself, although I'll invite Mr. Hill to refer to it when we offer him time. And then lastly, we received some communication from Mr. Zawinski with respect to comments offered from the Milton Public Works Department on the waivers that I think are detail oriented and we can address when we speak about the waivers. Some of those issues came up when we were talking about the waivers during the hearing on waivers that I think occurred in either July or August. I believe that's the extent of what the board has received in the last week. Are there any comments on that?
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one additional
Mr. Schumer.
item. Thank you very much. Within the last just a couple of minutes, actually, I sent over to Judy and to Bev an updated waiver list with just some very slightly corrected numbers based on the new design. No substantive changes other than the numbers in that list, but just wanted to make sure that everything was corrected, and I apologize for this coming in so late.
It's okay, thank you. Okay, let let me say that Mr. Zawinski is not going to be able to join us, nor is Chief Madden, the chief of the Milton Fire Department. But we do have correspondence from Mr. Madden indicating that the fire department, in the form of Mr. Madden, Chief Madden, has found the proposal to be acceptable, subject to some specific conditions that we've been provided. And I know Mr. Reardon, thank you, Mr. Reardon, for reviewing those conditions and confirming that they're consistent with the meeting. The applicant proposes 3 conditions to address the issues that have been raised. The applicant's provided some additional comment. I'm reading from an email, commentary about the issues, commentary about the turn and diagram showing what a potential change to the curb might look like. I'll forward those separately. The chief has expressed his satisfaction with these measures below. His comments have been filed under town comments for the record. The significance of this and the reason why I wanted to spend time on it is that it was only the fire department that had not had the opportunity to confirm its position with respect to the application. So I consider that to be now entered into the record. I think it speaks for itself. I don't intend to have a conversation unless people have questions about what the fire department has said or the conditions they've placed on the application. Do people have such questions or comments? Okay, so we'll consider that part of the record. Let me ask Mr. Schomer, could you please speak to the issue of the work that's been done on the auto turn analysis with respect to making certain that the trash truck will be able to enter and traverse along the site?
Certainly, I would be happy to, Mr. Chair. Just to let you know, our traffic consultant he's let me know that he's running a couple of minutes late, but he will be here momentarily. So if
That's like a joke, right?
it's not a joke, unfortunately. I wish it were. He told me
That's an old joke that we used to use at the Department of Public Works.
Is that right?
Yeah, traffic consultant's late to the meeting.
Of course he is. He told me he had a 6:30, another meeting at 6:30, and that he should be here just a few minutes after 7. So if there is anything else that we could cover, perhaps we could move on to that, but I'd be happy to talk about it. Although of course I can't speak of it in as detailed terms as Mr. Michaud could.
I am interested. It looks like we tonight we also got a letter from Mr. O'Donnell, who is the chair of the Historical Commission, from whom we've heard before. So that I'm just looking at my computer. That letter is in and will be entered into the record. I have a note here with respect to the condition of the manhole at the bottom of the hill that I believe we were going to speak about, or I asked a question about. I don't know if anybody's prepared, Mr. Schomer, if you're prepared to speak to that as to whether or not the applicant's proposing to do work there, or Mr. Reardon or Mr. Burke. I feel like that's a little bit of an unaddressed issue that we haven't spoke to what's going to happen. I know Mr. Gallagher spoke at the last hearing. Is there any testimony we should be taking on that?
If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair, I believe you're referring to the recommendation from Mr. Reardon that the invert in the manhole at the bottom of that hill be replaced. And my recollection from the last hearing was that Mr. Reardon testified that his conversation with our engineer, Jim Burke, who's on the line, was that Mr. Burke had agreed to that. So if that is the case, then I certainly won't disagree with him.
He did agree to that, but he's not the applicant.
Of course.
And Mr. If I could add, I just want to make sure that it has to be with the consent of the DPW. So I don't want Jim or I to be proposing measures that do not necessarily get approved by Chase.
Of course.
I think that's reasonable. Jim, do you mind turning your mic on and just addressing this further a little bit?
Sure. I think anytime you have a sewer manhole that has one outlet and three inlets with varying pitches coming into the manhole with the inflow that is impacting it, certainly can be addressed by maybe putting it in another structure. Or I think in the long run, I think a little bit better analysis with regards to what the issues are would help. I don't have any specific recommendations at this time for the invert itself, but I've been looking to work with the DPW and see what their Weston and Sampson sewer consultants would recommend and work from there.
I mean, let me drill down and be more specific. But it was my understanding that there was testimony that the invert needed repair, and that the repair of the invert would assist in helping the condition about which Mr. Gallagher has testified on several occasions. And when the question was asked to the applicant as to whether, when the question was asked by me to the peer reviewer as to whether or not that could be repaired, the indication was that he said, Mr. Inn said, yes, that would be a good idea. And I know he's right in front of me. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but something to that effect. And then said that you also, Mr. Burke, indicated that would be a good idea. My question and the specific issue is, we are proposing, or I am imagining that in the deliberation of this special permit, the board will consider a condition to the effect that the applicant will need to replace or repair the invert to the town's satisfaction. And that's really what I'm going for. I hear you as saying it's reasonable and possible and subject to more work, and all of that's fine. The question is it going to be repaired? And will a condition making it so to this special permit be acceptable?
I guess, from my perspective, you have a lot of flow coming in from Meeting House Lane. The Meeting House Lane comes in at a 5% pitch with a significant amount of inflow. And that, would tend to kind of block the flows from the other streets and the like. There's a couple of solutions that you can work with, in a sense that you can maybe put in a whole nother structure, leave the invert itself alone at the intersection of Meeting House Lane, and flatten out the pipe for Meeting House Lane and reduce the speed, if you will, the velocity of flow coming into that manhole. Another solution, honestly, and we're going to be doing this anyway, is reducing the infiltration and inflow to that particular system. Now, and this has been discussed with DPW in the past, and I realize it's not how it works, but there's a significant amount of fees associated with connecting to this source system, and the 4-to-1 I&I infiltration fee being prominent. It's something that I think needs further study. I think that identifying where the inflow and infiltration comes into the system is warranted and should be found. And I think that would make that invert operate in a much more efficient manner as opposed to altering it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Jim, do you mind if I jump in there? I think, and I don't mean to speak for you, Mr. Chair, but I think the question was a specific one. I think the recommendation was a specific one, and I think they're looking just for an answer, yes or no, are we going to do that work? And so I would turn to Mr. Tamposi to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that yes, we are, agreeable to a condition that dictates us, performing the work that's necessary to repair that manhole.
Thank you. That's great. Appreciate that. Okay, so we offered thank you, Mr. Burke and Mr. Schumer as well. We've offered to Mr. Schumer and Mr. Hill an opportunity to sum up their cases. Before we do that, I want to ask Mr. Hill. I mean, I received his letter. I can't tell you. I got this today. It's dated today. I can't tell you that I read the whole thing. I did go through it. Thank you for it. And I know it took a while to put together. Can I ask you if you put this together with the knowledge of the proposed conditions that the applicant has made?
No, I actually haven't reviewed the conditions. I wasn't copied on them, and I saw them today for the first time, and no, so these are conditions that I've used in the past in other projects. I work for
No,
zoning
you're
boards.
supposed to say that you've developed them painstakingly each night that we've met individually, a custom made for this hearing, and not that you've used them over and over, right?
Well, if my clients are listening, I did not spend a lot of time crafting tailor-made conditions. Some are, but a lot of them are boilerplate.
Okay. Well, it's well done. The reason I ask is I had been under the impression that you'd seen those conditions. I want to ask the board to consider leaving the hearing open for the purpose of accepting testimony from you, Mr. Hill, and from anybody on the conditions that the applicant has proposed. I mean, I've read the conditions the applicant has proposed. I thank you, Mr. Schumer, for them. But I feel like it's going to, I would like, before we debated the merits of the conditions here and keep this hearing open for one more week, to take a supplemental material on that aspect of it. Oh, and only that aspect of it, only because they haven't been widely distributed. I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, they're on the website now. So I'd like to invite, so anyway, that's a proposal I'd like to make, and we can debate that at the appropriate time, but I'd like to ask you, Mr. Hill, if you'd like to offer some summary comments on the state of the application in the nature of a wrap-up, subject to your opportunity to comment specifically on the conditions. Without, you don't have to, your letter speaks for itself. So if you want to supplement that in any way, you're invited to right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I won't obviously read the letter, but with respect to Mr. Schomer's conditions, I expect that they're familiar conditions that we've all used in the past, probably a lot of boilerplate conditions. I kind of view conditions on a comprehensive permit as falling into two buckets. You know, the first bucket is kind of like the boilerplate stuff that, you know, you might actually use for other projects in town, subdivisions, you know, surety provisions, you know, things like that. And then there are the relatively few conditions that really go to the meat of the parameters of the project. You know, what are you going to reduce, you know, something in the project? Are you going to require greater setbacks? Are you going to require more parking, things like that? And so those are like the tailor-made conditions. And so in my draft, you know, the first page or two are the tailor-made conditions, and the rest of it is, you know, mostly boilerplate conditions that I've used in the past that have worked well in other communities. But just going to the summary of our position, and members of the board, I think you heard me, I think a month ago I was here and I made a presentation with I think some slides, and I expressed our position at that time on all the outstanding issues. So I won't repeat that, but I did want to basically provide a summary of where we stand, especially with the new materials that have come in over the last month. And first, just to provide some context, you know, legal context, the legal framework. The Chapter 40B design guidelines that are published by the state say that with careful design and consideration, the project elements, careful design and consideration of the project elements in relationship to the adjacent streets and properties, Chapter 40B projects can better integrate with the surrounding context. This project is now at 84 apartment units in associated infrastructure, streets, and driveways on 4 acres of land with a density of 21 units per acre, with no mass transit, completely auto dependent, and surrounded by single family uses, except for the Delphi Academy. We would submit that this project does not integrate with the surrounding community. On the issue of design, you had an excellent peer reviewer, Cliff Bomer. Cliff provided a lot of comments throughout the course of the hearing, and a few of them stuck out. In June, Mr. Bomer specifically recommended that the building that's labeled the North Building, that was too large and too imposing, and it was hiding the existing residents. And he recommended that the front of the building be cut back so it's in plane, his words, in plane with the existing residence. He also recommended that the back of the building be stepped down and be pushed, further away from the Meeting House Lane neighbors, because from the Meeting House Lane perspective, this building presents as a 5-story structure. So the applicant, in response, partially addressed the first comment by bringing the building back, but not in plane. It was close, but it's not in plane with the existing residence. And then the applicant actually ignored completely the second comment, because what the applicant did is when they lost 12 units, when they cut back the front of the building, they basically just put those units somewhere else instead of just reducing the density. So 6 of the units went on top of the west building to make that a 5-story structure, and 6 units went to the back of the north building. So it actually did the opposite of what Mr. Bulmer had recommended. The Chapter 40B program expresses a real preference for sustainable development, and Mass Housing's application requires applicants to perform a self-audit of your project for compliance with the state's sustainable development principles that were adopted, I believe, in the Romney administration in 2007. This project is truly the antithesis of smart growth. The project site is barely supported by mass transit. There's a infrequent bus that comes by that you have to flag down to get on. The closest commuter rail is not within walking distance. This project is completely auto-dependent. Mr. Bulmer recognized that early in this process. Everybody who's looked at this project has come to the same conclusion. There are no sidewalks. There are some sidewalks, but there's not sidewalk connectivity currently with this project to any of the neighborhoods. There's no retail. There's no municipal services nearby. No recreational amenities nearby. Mr. Bulmer recognized that. Our traffic engineer recognized that. And despite the complete auto dependence of this project, the project only provides 130 parking spaces. That's a ratio of 1.55 per unit. And by comparison, your zoning bylaw requires 2 spaces per unit. Now, certainly the applicant can argue, well, that's what 40B is for, is to get waivers from the zoning bylaw. True, but only when it's appropriate, and only when granting waivers does not then create additional problems or causes local concerns that outweigh the need for housing. The ITE manual that everybody cites says that you need, for a project like this that is not within walking distance of mass transit, you need one parking space per bedroom. So even with the ITE manual, you'd need 143 spaces. This project has 130. A number of factors make expansion of the parking supply on the site untenable, necessitating instead a reduction in the parking demand, but that's not realistic in light of the project's auto dependence. Switching gears to the emergency access and intersection safety issue. You've recently received testimony and evidence that the auto turn that was provided in August demonstrates that that the town's ladder truck barely squeezes through these tight corners around the site. We provided testimony at the last meeting that the inside turning radius is not conforming to the state fire code. What you received today or whenever recently, I just saw it for the first time today, was a revised auto turn analysis by Mr. Michaud showing what the 25-foot inside radius would look like on the plan, which is truthful because it shows that the existing radius is not 25 feet. And it shows that in order to comply with a 25-foot inside radius requirement, the swept path crosses over the curb. Now, the applicant might say, well, that's not the wheels, that's the body of the fire truck. Still, that's not what the fire code requires. And do we really want something as narrow as possible that barely complies or a truck barely squeezes by? I don't think that's what Milton wants, and that's not what Milton deserves. We can have a project that works. We can have a project that doesn't sacrifice public safety and still provide affordable housing. I'm going to move on to wastewater, since that was a topic that was discussed in the last few meetings. In Milton, the director of the DPW issues sewer connection permits. We didn't really talk about this much yet. There's a sewer regulation in Milton. That sewer regulation says that the director, Chase Berkeley, may require an evaluation by a professional engineer to assess the impact the additional flow would have on the public sewer. The cost of the evaluation would be borne by the applicant, and the permit application may be denied if the additional flow is determined to have an adverse effect. Now, here you've got you have the traffic and you have the sewer engineer, Jim Burke, saying that the flow is roughly 15,000 gallons per day. We agree with that. That's the Title V flow. And we have the sewer connecting to an existing sewer main and meeting house lane that's 8 inches in diameter. That main converges with 2 other tributaries at that manhole we've been talking about, and then that goes down to the MWRA pipe at the bottom of meeting house lane. The applicant, typically when project developers tie into an existing sewer infrastructure, and particularly with a project this size, what you would normally see is a hydraulic capacity analysis. And Mr. Reardon can speak to this. I know he's been involved in preparing them. He's been involved in reviewing them. I've worked on many 40Bs where developer engineers provide hydraulic capacity analysis. That has not been provided here. I think that's what the sewer regulation contemplated. Instead, what we got was a report from EST, which basically collected some flow data for 2 weeks by putting sensors in the manhole. It was acknowledged at the board's hearing by Mr. Burke and by Mr. Reardon that the EST study contained a number of seemingly conflicting flow ratings. You heard testimony that that's normal. As a layperson, I find that hard to swallow. We know that this meeting house lane pipe is inundated with groundwater. It's inundated to 3.5 to 4 inches of groundwater. That's a problem. When evaluating or when designing these sewer connections in Massachusetts, engineers have to comply with a technical document called TR16. And what TR16 says is that the design engineer is supposed to apply a peaking factor to both the existing flows and the anticipated future flows. And the peaking factor for the existing flows, according to TR16, is a multiplier of 5.6. While the board does not have a true hydraulic capacity analysis here, it can draw some conclusions from the EST report. The downstream segment that was measured in August, the average flow rate was 50.1 gallons per minute, which if peaked using that 5.6 multiplier would be 280 gallons per minute. The project's design flow for the 84 housing units would be 15,000 gallons per day, which we just discussed, which equates to 10.77 gallons per minute. Now, Mr. Reardon applied a peaking factor of 4, which we don't disagree with, which results in a peak flow of 43 gallons per minute. So if this flow is added to the existing peak flow, the combined flow would be 323 gallons per minute. Now, the highest recorded flow rate in this segment of the system over that 2-week period was 236. So 236 compared to 323. And that caused the water level inside that segment to exceed 6 inches of an 8-inch pipe. So it begs the question: what's going to happen if you did the calculation the right way by applying peaking factors to both existing and future flows, and you get 323? This really raises a concern that we are taking a big risk in terms of the capacity of the sewer system that, in our view, has not been adequately addressed. Regarding hydrology, the planning board commented in end of July. Their last comment to you, they commented that while the project's an improvement over the first design, which would have destroyed the house and the gardens, the massive size of the 2 buildings creates substantial engineering issues that have not been satisfactorily addressed. We know, according to the applicant's own test pit data, that we're dealing with shallow groundwater across the site. We know that the project will significantly increase stormwater runoff over existing conditions due to substantial lot coverage. The applicant is proposing a network of stormwater collection systems, including infiltration on the site. There's 2 discharge points, one to the unnamed stream off site and one to the Meeting House Lane system, which ultimately discharges to Pine Tree Brook and to the Ponset River. The applicant's stormwater report indicates that the proposed infiltration systems will recharge cumulatively 280% more water than under existing conditions. And our expert, Mr. Horsley, Scott Horsley, testified that this increase will cause rises in groundwater levels, the water table, throughout the site and on adjacent properties. It'll also increase the base flow to the adjacent stream in the wetland. That's a concern. Related to that is the construction of the west building. We know from the applicant's own test pit data that the groundwater at that location, the seasonal high groundwater in the location of the west building is only 2 feet below the surface, yet the building itself is proposed to be dug and installed 13 to 15 feet below grade. So you're going to have a parking garage that'll be approximately 12 feet below the seasonal high groundwater table. Now, this issue came up several months ago. It really hasn't been discussed since, but it's still a problem because the applicant has never done a hydrogeological study, has not provided an opinion from a structural engineer as to whether the foundation can sustain the hydrostatic pressure from the groundwater in this location. And there really hasn't been any evaluation as to what effect that will have, either a damming effect or otherwise, on the infiltration systems across the site. Now, relatedly, we have the issue with the Meeting House Lane system and the issue with the offsite drainage report. We've probably beaten that to death, but I just want to remind the board that the report that was provided from Mr. Burke, the numbers in the report do show that there's going to be increases of flow rates and volumes from the site at the point of discharge from the site, and that's labeled as Reach 5R on the stormwater watershed maps. Mr. Burke, in his report, had represented that there would be a reduction of flow going off site as a result of the project, but that was based upon readings and calculations taken at Reach 9R, which is at a different location, much further down away from the project site at basically Alfred Road. And that reading is not credible for this purpose because it includes a watershed area that includes properties on Barbara Lane. Reach 5R is only for the project site, and that's the appropriate location to be determining whether you have increases of net grade, increases of volume and rates that is relevant to standard number 2 with the state stormwater standards. So that has not been satisfactorily addressed in our view, and is going to, in our view, we believe that the stormwater system is unproven, that we feel that there's going to be increases of rates and volumes through the Meeting House system, which is already surcharged under existing conditions. Mr. Burke has testified, and we agree that the existing infrastructure in Meeting House Lane, the existing off-site stream, is surcharged during extreme storm events already. There is flooding in people's yards. There is flooding at the intersection of Meeting House and Alfred Road. So all of this brings us to what do we do with all these concerns, and how can we permit a project that still provides affordable housing for the town of Milton, but yet doesn't create new problems? In our view, the only sensible solution is to scale back the size of the buildings, reduce the impervious surfaces, reduce the parking demand. That'll free up more space for on-site stormwater storage. That's what we've been calling on the applicant to do during the course of the hearing. And the applicant has made some changes. They obviously have reduced the size of the project. They've reduced the density, but it doesn't nearly go far enough. So what we've proposed in our conditions on starting on page 14 of our letter today, is that first, the eastern or the front end of the north building should be modified to the, the back end of the north building. The one that faces Meeting House Lane should be modified by eliminating that two-story section that extends 33 feet out from the north building, and creating a new two-story section at that end that's in plane with a retaining wall that is proposed in the back of the property. Then the remaining building should be reduced to 3 stories from 4, which it currently is. With that reduction in massing, you will decrease the demand for parking, free up land on the site to provide more storage for stormwater. This also is consistent with the design comments that you received from Mr. Bomer, from the Planning Board and the Historic Commission. The north building should also be modified for that matter by actually making the front end in plane with the historic building. The applicant didn't fully honor Mr. Bomer's request. We feel that Mr. Bomer's request was eminently reasonable and it should have been complied with. And that's an easy fix. With respect to the parking garage being submerged in the groundwater, we feel that that can be addressed by simply eliminating the parking garage element of the west building, keeping the subsurface garage under the north building, because that's important so that you have at least a parking garage that's out of view. There are benefits to having a subsurface garage. You have mechanical rooms and trash storage. The west building should be further modified by eliminating that 5th floor. That was a big mistake. The west building was fine the way it was, 4 stories. It should have been kept that way. The project shall provide 2 parking spaces per unit. This is a minimum. This project is not walkable to anything. It's auto dependent. It needs 2 parking spaces per unit. The project should comply with the state fire code. I know that Attorney Schomer had proposed that as a condition.
Excuse me, Mr. Hill,
Yes.
we've got all that in your letter. You're on page 15 of a 27-page letter. You're gonna read the whole letter?
No, I was just going to highlight some of the conditions.
Oh,
I can
okay.
wrap up.
Okay, well, I mean, this is your time, but I want to move the agenda as well, so I just use it judiciously, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost done. I'll just
Okay.
wrap up.
Fair enough.
With respect to the open space, the applicant was complying with the open space requirement of 75%. We feel that just with all these changes, the applicant should still comply with the 75% open space requirement. And there shouldn't be any further encroachments into the setbacks to the abutting residential properties. We also have a condition in here about preservation of trees. There is excavation proposed within or in close proximity to residential property lines. So we have, I think, a reasonable condition with respect to that tree preservation requiring trees be surveyed. And we also are proposing that stormwater system be modified so that there is no increase of rates or flows coming off the site at breach 5R. And that has to be accomplished through, like I said, more storage space, storage areas on the site to be able to hold back that water more than it's currently being held back. That will prevent where everyone is concerned about is more flooding in that area at the bottom of Meeting House Lane. So those are the highlights, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I hope that you'll find our conditions useful. I'm happy to comment on Attorney Schomer's conditions and whatever Judy Barrett drafts as well.
Thank you. As one member of the board, I do find the conditions to be helpful, and I appreciate the time you've spent putting them together. So thank you. Questions from the members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hill, the conditions you proposed around the stormwater system are they're very specific. I'm just wondering if they are recommendations from your expert or if they are pinned to certain standards?
They come out of our comment letters that we've filed. Is there one in particular that you was curious about?
I've now closed your letter, but I mean, I'm making this up, but for example, it says, you know, such system must have a ratio of X to Y. And I'm wondering where that ratio comes from, if that's a sort of a set standard or if that's your expert's opinion. I can also reopen it. Give me a sec.
Yeah, I'm looking at condition 11. Is that what you're referring to?
What does that say?
The applicant shall revise the stormwater report as follows in those A, B, and C.
Okay, I have it now. Sorry, everyone, bear with me. Yes, exactly, 11. The assumed depth of saturated thickness shall not exceed the actual depth of saturated thickness as measured through test pits witnessed by an agent of the Conservation Commission. And then C, I guess, is what I was remembering with, it's referring to specific peak rates and volumes of flows.
Right. So C relates to standard number 2 of the state stormwater standards. And this was developed by myself and John Chesia, our civil engineer. And basically, standard number 2 says that you can't have higher rates of flow coming off your site under future conditions than you do under existing conditions. And I'm making a very simplistic statement. I'm sure Sean can correct me, but as a basic principle, you're not supposed to create conditions that result in greater flows. So this is simply saying that the project should comply with that requirement. And it does require attenuation of peak rates and volumes, since the volume issue does come into play where we know we have flooding issues, we have capacity issues, and state DEP standards do discuss volumes as well as rates. Certainly this will be an issue that the Conservation Commission will get into because this project will have to go before the Conservation Commission. But we feel that this requiring compliance with this standard would go a long way to alleviate the concern about flooding on that street. And the saturated thickness issue comes from Scott Horsley's comment letter that we submitted back this past summer. And the saturated thickness, I don't fully understand it myself, but as I understand the concept, it's the space under the infiltration systems that basically provide storage for the recharge that the infiltration systems do. And so in this case, the applicant used a higher saturated thickness depth than what the applicant really knows. So the applicant assumed it's a variable that the applicant puts into their model. It's a computer model, it's a simulation model. So it's only as good as the inputs. And the applicant put an input of 20 feet of depth, although the applicant only has test pit data that goes 6 feet down. So really it's not appropriate to be assuming that you have 20 feet of depth of storage ability when all you know is 6 feet. Now, they can go back and dig 20 feet and they could say, well, we have 20 feet, but that hasn't been established at this point. And so we're saying that you should only be using an input figure for which you actually know you have.
Thank you. I'm so lost, but I appreciate your effort. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Giselle, for the question. So I have several questions for you, Mr. Hill, and first, thank you for this, and I must confess that I'm not familiar with either your or Mr. Schomer's well-developed boilerplate language. So simple question to begin with. Is this boilerplate language or is this language specific to this particular project and application?
So some of it's both. So most of it is boilerplate. I can tell you that on page 14, all those conditions are tailored for this project. The language, 10 and 11 are tailored for this. Same thing with 12. The tree protection condition of 15 I've used in other projects, actually including one in Belmont that this applicant's involved with. So he's familiar with that language. And then once you get to 16, most of this language is boilerplate that that can be used for most any project, and it's not even necessarily exclusive to 40B projects. You might see this kind of language in a subdivision permit. So I'm not as I'm mostly concerned about the tailored language. If the town of Milton already has boilerplate that you like on these issues, then by all means use that. I was only providing this as a courtesy that if you need some language for specific issues, you have it here that you can use.
Thank you for that answer. And relative to the particular paragraph that we were just speaking about a couple of minutes ago, I believe it's paragraph 11, subsection C, A, B, and C. Are those boilerplate or are those specifically tailored?
No, that's tailored. So the issue there is, the language is the language that's comes from the standard number 2, the state standard, but it's tailored for this because we're specifically requiring the applicant to meet that pre and post peak rate issue at the discharge rate that's reached 5R, which is at the property line. So I wanted to make it clear that that's where we think that's where we think that the analysis was flawed, because the applicant was giving us analysis based upon a downstream location. The design point for purposes of standard 2 has to be the property line. And that can't be disputed. That comes from DEP standards. It comes from the Conservation Commission handbook. It specifically states that's where you measure the pre and post.
Thank you for that clarification. Would you agree or disagree with the statement that if we approve this sort of condition, bit of a hypothetical question, could we be potentially tying the Conservation Commission's hands on this particular issue? Is this something that's better left to the Conservation Commission?
I don't see how it would be tying their hands. The commission doesn't have to adopt this language in its own order of conditions. This might be more strict than what the commission would order, or it might not be as strict. I don't think there will be a conflict. If there would be a conflict, then we can cross that bridge when we get to it. But the applicant can always come back to the zoning board and request a modification to a condition if there's an issue like this, if there's a conflict between two boards, and that happens relatively frequently.
Thank you for your answer. Final question, and it's been a long hearing. I believe this is the 28th hearing on this particular thing. And I seem to recall, I did a quick search of my notes as well. At some point in time, I believe the applicant did go back and did do some additional test pits, if you will, if you can fill in the blank for the right term. Was that true? I think it was. I think they did. Were they insufficient or in the wrong place?
I don't think so. I think they were done properly. I don't think we have any issues with their test pits.
So if you don't have any issues with the test pits, then must confess, I'm a bit confused because you're suggesting that basically in certain areas, they either dug at the wrong place or they didn't go down far enough to get what you believe is credible data. Is that a fair statement?
That only is true with respect to the saturated thickness, because the applicant is using an assumption that the depth of saturated thickness goes down 20 feet. And they don't know that unless they actually dug a pit 20 feet down and looked at the soils 20 feet down. So they're making an assumption that there's 20 feet of saturated thickness. And I'm not criticizing the test pit. I'm criticizing the use of the assumption. And this isn't from me. This is from our hydrologist, Scott Worsley. And his advice or his concern is that when applicants do that, they could be underestimating the storage capacity of the site to handle the recharge significantly. And that's a problem if they don't have as much storage as they think they have. So for example, if the saturated thickness was only 6 feet and they've assumed 20, that's going to change the way their model spits out, how you can develop the stormwater system. It's a computer simulation model. So it has to be accurate in terms of those inputs. If it's not accurate, then you will have problems down the road.
Are you essentially asserting garbage in, garbage out on the inputs and the use of the model by the applicant?
I'm saying that this one variable is not supported by evidence. It's a variable that was used, and other applicants have done the same thing. We've seen this in other projects. Applicants sometimes use variables that aren't supported. I think that actually has happened in other cases in this project that Mr. Burke has then corrected. So it happens a lot that applicants use variables. Peer reviewers say, hey, we don't agree with that variable. It could be the soil conditions. It could be the curve number. There's a lot of different variables that engineers debate about and say, is this appropriate or not? And then in most cases, they're resolved because the engineers decide what the correct variable is. This is one of those cases where we think the variable is incorrect.
Are you suggesting that the entire project should hinge on this particular dispute or factor, or are you suggesting that it is a combination of factors?
I'm saying that there's a combination of factors that, in our view, is likely to cause problems in the future after this project's built. We are concerned about the drainage capacity, and part of that drainage capacity concern is the model that the applicant used. I would say that that's one piece of it, but it's probably not the most important. It's probably not even the top 3 or 4 most important pieces. We're more concerned about the capacity of the Meeting House Lane system to handle the flows. We're concerned about the stream offsite that already surcharges. So it's a combination of issues. That this is just one issue. But I really can't speak. It's a better question addressed to our engineer than me. To what extent this overestimation could be problematic to the design, I can't speak competently about that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, and thank you for your answers to my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving me the time to ask those. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Further questions of Mr. Hill? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Schumer.
Oh, I just had one, please, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Joffer.
So, Mr. Hill, I haven't read the conditions in detail. I've scanned them. I don't think I saw one related to the easement issue, and I was wondering if that's one you considered or thought would be appropriate.
We did consider it, and the case law under 40B is such that zoning boards aren't really in the position of authority to get concerned about title interests. And the case law has said that if the subsidizing agency is satisfied with respect to title issues, then the zoning board can't object to the title, can't raise those questions. If they want to raise a title issue, they can raise it with the subsidizing agency. So I think, so my approach with that was that's really a private property matter between our client at 56 Meeting House Lane and the developer. If the developer doesn't have adequate easement rights, there's going to be an issue, and that either gets worked out or it doesn't. But it's not really, I don't view that as really relevant to the board's review of the project, which has more to do with should waivers be granted and what conditions can we put on the project to balance the local concerns with the need for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you. Mr. Schomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just note before I begin, our traffic engineer, Mr. Michaud, has arrived to the meeting. So would you like to hear from him now, or would you prefer that I go ahead?
Does his testimony not speak for itself?
I think it does, Mr. Chair. There was a question raised earlier and a request for him to clarify the trash truck access and his auto turn analysis.
Oh, okay. Why don't we ask Mr. Michaud to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. And I think the submitted materials do speak for themselves. The points that Attorney Hill raised related to fire access in the lower corner of the subject lot. We've confirmed, and it's written in our submitted material, that the design as submitted meets the applicable standards of care as it relates to vehicle access for those larger responding vehicles, that the effective swept path, the inside curve, so to speak, does meet the fire code requirements of 25 feet. But in an effort to provide increased maneuverability, which is never a bad thing, the site plan will be engineered and modified in its final form to include a formal designated 25-foot curb radius that will open up that corner of the lot even more to allow a more generous swing area or sweep area within the property. We've likewise tested the smaller vehicle, the trash refuse truck, which is well within the same swept path area of that fire apparatus and poses no issue in terms of its ability to circulate properly within to or from the subject property. With that, I think the only other comment would have been related to restricting parking within the so-called cul-de-sac element at the building front, which can be achieved through appropriate signage. And with that, I'll hand it back to Attorney Schomer.
Mr. Michaud, is it your testimony that the trash truck is smaller than the fire vehicle?
Much smaller.
And
it is
your testimony that the inside turning radio, all inside turning radii within the project will comply with the fire prevention code?
Yes.
Okay. No further questions. Questions of the members? Thank you, Mr. Michaud. Mr. Schomer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll keep my remarks brief tonight. I have approximately, I would say, 45 minutes on saturated thickness, and then I'll move to about an hour of swept path analysis.
Oh, that's so funny.
Thank you. For my part, Mr. Chair and board members, I'd like to thank you for your time and your attention and your work throughout these hearings. I believe you're right, Mr. O'Brien. I believe this is the 28th hearing. We've all been on a long road, and your time and your effort on this is very much appreciated. We know that you have been reviewing this very closely, and that's very much appreciated. And I think the project is better for it because of your efforts, because of the efforts of Mr. Reardon, Ms. Barrett, Mr. Zerwinski, Chief Madden, Mr. Berkeley, Jeff Dirk, the traffic engineer, as well as, of course, Cliff Bomer. As well, I would add Attorney Hill and his consultants, as well as his clients and the rest of the neighborhood. The input was heard on our side and received, and we feel that the project is much improved because of it. I won't go point by point and respond to what Attorney Hill has just said, but I want to make a couple of quick points to respond to that. And I haven't had a chance to review his proposed conditions. But what I would like to point out to the board is that what Attorney Hill is proposing and essentially inviting the board to do in this case is to redesign this project as it's currently proposed. He's proposing significant modifications of these buildings, which are not being proposed by the applicant. And what he's inviting the board to do is effectively the same thing that was done in the case of the Randolph Avenue 40B application, which at this point has been involved in litigation for a number of years at great expense, not only to the developer, but also to the town. And I think the takeaway from that is that redesigning a 40B project on the invitation of someone who's not part of the process is not the way to go. And I would urge the board to decline Attorney Hill's invitation to do that in this instance. I feel that the design has been reached by triangulating with the opinions of the town's peer reviewers, by Attorney Hill's client consultants, as well as ours, and come up with a project that works for the town, we feel, works for the neighbors, and works for the developer. A second point that I'd like to make, and this has to do with a comment that has come up a number of times in this hearing, and that's Attorney Hill's comments regarding sustainable development and the auto dependency of this site. And I recall a comment that I think it was a throwaway that Mr. Zawinski made at one point during the hearing, probably the second or third session, but he said something to the effect of Milton being a community that's grappling with land use decisions of the past. And I think that that's an extremely profound statement that he made. These issues of sustainable development and auto dependency, those kind of issues, that's a product of 50 to 60, 70, 80 years of governmental policy at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level that really promotes the use of automobiles, promotes single family zoning, and promotes low density development of areas like Milton, which is obviously it's a lovely area, and it's beautiful, and it's a great place to live. But the density of a place like Milton, being the direct next door neighbor to the city of Boston, as there's been testimony in this hearing, even the next door neighbor to Boston does not at this point have a sufficient population density to even justify a dedicated bus stop on Blue Hill Avenue. And that was testified to earlier in the hearing. And what I would say on this point of auto dependency and sustainable development is that in order to bring transport options and reduce auto dependency, there's a need to increase housing, and there's a need to increase population density. And the most consequential effort that can be made towards sustainable residential development is higher density construction of housing in urban areas. And that would include inner core communities such as Milton, which, as I said a moment ago, is a stone's throw away from the city of Boston. Milton is a rural community and field, but it really is very close to the urban center of Boston. And so every site like this, which provides several acres of area where it's possible to build higher density housing than is normally allowed under conventional zoning, is an opportunity to reduce auto dependency by reducing vehicle trips from communities that are coming out from farther and farther locations as people have to move farther and farther away from the urban center because of things like single family zoning. So those points are well taken. It's understood that there needs to be transit oriented housing, but there also needs to be, in general, more housing everywhere. And that would include sites like this. So to transition from there, just to my general remarks, Mr. Chair, I'd like to spend just a couple of moments going through a little bit of the history of the project, and this is more for the benefit, I think, of members of the public, just to remind everyone how far we've come in the last 9 or 10 months. As everyone may recall, when this project was initially approved by Mass Housing and presented to this board, it was proposed as a single large building with 118 residential units. And it was over 176 parking spaces in a garage with 4 stories of residences atop those. And as you may recall from the initial plans, a significant portion of the site was dedicated to that building and the parking structure beneath. There was no programmed bicycle parking on that design. The only outdoor amenity space, well, the primary outdoor amenity space was the man-made outdoor deck, which was on top of the parking garage. And the plan called for the demolition of the McGinley Mansion and the Ellen Biddle Shipman Gardens in their entirety, which we heard quite a bit of testimony about. And what we heard from that testimony was that it was of great importance to the community, to the neighbors, to the historical commission, to this board, to the planning board and the select board, that those structures be saved and be considered in the design of this project. And that was specifically recommended also by Mr. Bomer in his comments. In March of 2021, we came back to this board with a completely redesigned project. It was reduced to 92 units. And at that time, we introduced the preservation plan scheme, which proposed to retain the entirety of the Shipman Garden complex and the significant portion of the McGinley Mansion House. In several months later, in May of 2021, we reduced this project again to 86 units, and that was done for the purpose of reducing the massing and providing a step design on the north building, which was a recommendation of Mr. Bomer at that time. The current proposal before the board is for 2 smaller buildings rather than 1 large building, including the adaptive reuse of the McGinley Mansion. The proposal before you is 84 residential units, which is a 29% reduction over the original proposal. The proposed number of parking spaces is currently 130, which is a 26% reduction. However, the ratio of parking spaces to residential units has been slightly increased to 1.55, and that was at the recommendation of Mr. Dirk, the town's traffic consultant. Additionally, we have provided significant programming of indoor and outdoor bicycle parking spaces, 73 in total to be exact, almost 1 per residential unit in this project. And we've also designed with the consultation of Mr. Bomer, our architects and landscape architects have designed multiple outdoor amenity spaces, including passive amenities and active amenities, a dog run, a children's playground, the new front patio, as well as the preservation, as I mentioned, of the entirety of the McGinley Garden complex. So just to recap for just a moment, the issues that were gone through during peer review, I want to go back to Mr. Bomer's original letter to the board based on his review of the initial project that was before you, and that was from February of this year. And his comments in general were that the development was, in his view, out of scale and character with the neighborhood, provided insufficient recreational space and open space, and he recommended a preservation-driven concept. And in his comments to the board at a subsequent hearing, he said something to the effect of that this site and the fact that this garden complex was there and the rarity of it presented an opportunity for the town, for the board, and for the applicant to create something really special. And so what we did is we took that advice to heart, and we came back and we sat down with Mr. Bomer and Mr. Reardon on multiple group sessions held with them. And we thank them again for their time in participating in those sessions. They were of great help. The project went through multiple plan revisions, as I just outlined, including a change to this preservation-driven design. And at last week's hearing, I would just remind the board that Mr. Bomer did come back and he presented his remarks regarding the current state of this proposed development. And his comments last week were that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but his comments last week were that the current massing proposal minimized the impact on the public realm. And he commented also that the street views that we had provided shows that the buildings work in the context of the neighborhood. He opined that the architecture as currently proposed is successful. And he specifically said that in his opinion, the new top story of the proposed west building was, in his view, a successful design. He stated that he was in support of these building types. He thought that the new front courtyard change was successful. He opined that the photometric study showed a minimal impact on neighbors of light intrusion. And at a previous hearing he held on August the 4th, he also stated that in his view, the site intensity of use was at a reasonable place. And I would just remind the board members that at that time, the project had not yet been revised to its current iteration with the layout that we currently see with less intense use on the site. So in our view, we've worked really hard to address Mr. Bomer's concerns and his comments and his opinions. And we feel that this has been successful and has really resulted in a great project. And as he said at that previous hearing, something that is really going to be special in the town of Milton. We think it's successful where we are now. Regarding engineering and stormwater, and I hesitate to paraphrase him because I see Mr. Reardon is on the line tonight, and thank you very much for being here as always. In general, the comments through the engineering and stormwater peer review process were to request some specific changes to the stormwater design, the specifications of those systems, and the distance and setbacks to the proposed buildings and the foundations of those buildings. Mr. Reardon also requested that we consider designing the stormwater system with a surface detention pond, which is a lower impact design measure. He requested that we provide a hard stormwater connection to the municipal infrastructure in Meeting House Lane. There was a request for additional test pits, which were done. Mr. Reardon requested an offsite infrastructure impact study, a sewer flow test in Meeting House Lane, as well as the filing of a construction management plan and the recommendation of reconstruction of the invert in the Meeting House Lane manhole, which we were discussing earlier tonight. And all of these requests in this hearing, we feel have been addressed satisfactorily. And in Mr. Reardon's most recent letter, or second most recent letter, I suppose it is, he stated, and I quote, "Most of our concerns have been substantively addressed. Where issues are unresolved or otherwise require further clarification, we have suggested conditions that could be included in a decision to address related concerns." So as with architecture and design, we feel that a great deal of effort has gone into resolving the issues of stormwater management and sewer impacts and general site engineering and layout. And again, thank you, Mr. Reardon, for all your work and in making this project as good as it can be. We look forward to going forward and working with you and reviewing the conditions as we move forward with this hearing process. And we feel that the suggestion that resolving any outstanding matters through conditions is possible at this point because the major issues in our view have been resolved. One final point, and I don't mention this last because it's of any less importance than the others, is the issue of traffic and safety. And it's been a while since Mr. Dirk has been before the board, but just to remind the board members that in his initial letters, he had requested that an additional traffic study be conducted in the Robbins Street, Blue Hill Avenue intersection, and as well as the crash history for that intersection. He requested additional details on bicycle accommodations, as well as a comprehensive traffic demand management plan. He requested an increased parking ratio of 1.52. He also requested that we provide additional information to demonstrate full emergency vehicle and trash vehicle access throughout the site, as well as some adjustment to the driveway slope and details on site triangles at the site entry points. And again, all of these issues have been resolved. And in his April 14 letter, he stated, Mr. Dirk stated that we are satisfied that the applicant has addressed the comments that were raised and the majority of the follow-up comments that were identified in our April 9, 2021 letter concerning the revised site plan. So on all three disciplines where there was extensive peer review, we did a lot of work and we really rolled up our sleeves and worked with the town's peer reviewers to improve this project and make it work and make it permittable. And we feel that we're at that point. We feel that the site is appropriate, the density is appropriate, the intensity of use has been demonstrated to be appropriate for the site. And we feel that this project is in a great place to go forward and to bring some affordable housing and badly needed market housing to the town of Milton and some new neighbors to the folks who have been on the line and providing their feedback regarding the neighborhood which again, very much appreciated because those of us who don't live on that street or don't live in Milton itself, we don't know those details without them being given to us, and the neighbors have been integral in providing that and making this project better. So that concludes my remarks, Mr. Chair. Would it please the board at this time for my client just to say a few words in closing?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Joe Tamposi. Thank you.
Mr. Tamposi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, board. For the record, I'm Joe Tamposi of Comprehensive Land Holdings. Like Jesse said, I think that first of all, we just want to sincerely thank the board's consultants, the town staff, the members of the public for all the participation in this hearing. After 10 months of hearings, it could be easy to get cynical or discouraged, but we truly do appreciate everyone's efforts in working cooperatively towards a project that we can all be proud of. When we first proposed the project at 582 Blue Hill Avenue, our goal was to take on an underutilized mansion home on an oversized property and turn it into a meaningful number of housing units to help address the need for both market rate and affordable housing in Milton. The board's goal was to thoroughly vet this project, take into account feedback from its independent third-party peer review professionals, town staff, and the public to ensure that the creation of this housing, which is required under state law to meet the local and regional need for affordable housing, would not negatively impact local concerns. And from very early on in the hearings, as Jesse said, it became readily apparent to us that those most critical concerns of the board and the public were one, preserving the historic Shipman Gardens, and two, making sure that this project's stormwater drainage and sewer would not negatively impact the abutters. Now, it's taken a significant effort from all parties involved, but we've succeeded in reaching each of those goals. We followed the recommendations of the board's peer reviewers, and we drastically revised our site approach to focus on a historic preservation-driven design and a robust stormwater controls. The plan before you preserves the historic gardens in their entirety, as well as the main facade of the historic mansion. These serve as the focal points of an attractive, well thought out community of buildings, programmed amenity areas, and open spaces that support residential living and good design principles. We entirely revamped our proposed stormwater management system, eliminating the underbuilding drainage, spreading the stormwater detention areas throughout the site, and utilizing the natural topography of the site to create a surface drainage basin, which simplifies construction and maintenance of the system. The board has heard clearly and emphatically from its peer review engineer that the stormwater system as proposed meets the Massachusetts stormwater standards. It will not increase the rate of runoff to neighboring properties. It will not cause flooding problems for downstream neighbors, and it's adequately and appropriately sized and designed with the proper redundancies to ensure that it will function as it's designed. Now, anyone certainly has the right to question the drainage, but at this point, our registered professional engineer is certified to this board with his professional qualifications that the drainage system works. The board's independent third-party registered professional engineer, Mr. Reardon, has thoroughly reviewed the proposed design and testified to this board that the drainage system works. And finally, the town's DPW director, Mr. Berkeley, has concurred with Mr. Reardon's findings and testimony that the drainage system on this site works. We believe there should be no doubt at this point about the ability of the property to comply with stormwater standards and not exacerbate any of the drainage problems that we've heard testimony about in the neighborhood. Furthermore, at the request of the board, as Jesse said, we completed a 2-week-long sewer flow monitoring study to measure the capacity of the Meeting House Lane sewer to handle the sewage from this project. The data shows clearly that there is adequate capacity in the existing sewer line to handle the proposed flow from the project. This has been reviewed and confirmed by Mr. Reardon, and in fact, our connection will most likely reduce the amount of inflow and infiltration to the sewer system, which would improve the Meeting House Lane sewer operations during storm events. Further, just earlier in this hearing, you heard from us that we're certainly amenable to a condition that would require us to work with the DPW to help further resolve that sewer manhole in Meeting House Lane. So in sum, The proposal for the board has been designed, reviewed, redesigned, adjusted, readjusted, and ultimately improved over the course of 10 months of hearings. And it shows. It is a beautifully designed project that is going to be an asset for the town of Milton. And we really appreciate the consideration and thought that has gone into making this the best design possible. We thank the board and all the parties who have been involved for their efforts, attention, ideas, comments, questions, and testimony. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to getting our Wednesday nights back. So unless the board has further questions for me, I'll cede the floor and we can continue the hearing. Thank you again. We really do appreciate all the time and thought that's gone into this project.
Thank you, Mr. Tamposi. Let me ask the members if they've got questions for Mr. Schomer or Mr. Tamposi.
No questions for me. Thank you both.
Mr. O'Brien.
No questions from me either, Mr. Chairman, though if I could just take a moment at this particular time to thank both Mr. Hill and Mr. Schomer for their summary statements and for their assistance to the board throughout this entire process. So I think I speak for the chair and Ms. Joffrey as well, that we very much appreciate your level of expertise and attention to detail that you brought to this hearing. So thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Mr. Schomer, I'd like you to provide to the board one list of the plans, of the most recently submitted plans that have come in with the dates, which could serve as a comprehensive list that we can tie into any conditions that the board is going to deliberate. Is it fair? Will you do that?
Yes, I will. That makes sense.
I think it would also be helpful if, I know you've got notes there, and off those notes you described for the board what the project is today. I want to make sure that your narrative matches up with our narrative for the purposes of making certain that we're defining the project in the right way.
Okay. Does that mean you would like me to prepare a written statement of following along with the comments that I made?
Something that can be used to define the project.
Sure.
In the narrative form.
Happy to do so.
Here's the project, this is how it's described, and this is shown on these plans, you know?
Yes, I understand. Thank you for the clarification.
So I looked at your conditions and I see the reference to the gardens, and I heard the testimony on your acknowledgement of the importance of the restoration of the mansion and the gardens as an important local concern. But we're not really saving the mansion, and we're not really restoring the gardens. We're doing the best we can, or the project is doing the best it can. And I think Mr. O'Donnell has spoken to that a couple of times. So in as much as I do think, and I know there's been a lot of testimony that this has been a positive development, I wonder where the board is, where the applicant is with respect to affirmative measures to be taken to actually keep the mansion in the condition that's shown on the plans. In other words, to the extent that restoring the mansion is an important project element, I don't see anything in the conditions that you've proposed that would keep the mansion in the state in which you propose to put it.
Do you, just to clarify, Mr. Chair, are you referring to something just ensuring that the mansion is not changed in use in the future?
Without specific approval of somebody in the future, something to that effect. I don't want to design it right now, but I didn't see anything along those lines. I heard about its importance, but I don't know how much we can rely on that if we're not taking steps to ensure that it is being protected insofar as it is being protected, because as Mr. O'Donnell has pointed out, it is being partly demolished. So perhaps, Mr. Schomer, you could consider that unless you want to address it now, but you could consider that.
No, I think that's a good point, Mr. Chair. I think it's something that can be addressed in a condition that ensures that the mansion be maintained in its proposed use, and some appropriate oversight for the as the plans move forward and the details get finalized, because the plans do contain programming of the inside of the mansion. But though I think those details, fair to say, are tentative at this point.
Yeah, I have to say, I like the idea of programming the mansion. I have a sense that more people will have a chance to enjoy it than might otherwise be the case, but that's my own view. During the time that we were talking about the garden, the provision of the McGinley Gardens, there was some discussion about the applicant doing a historical a cataloging of the gardens, their condition, the history, maybe an interpretive marker, things you would see, things that we've been familiar with in similar projects. I didn't see you offering on the applicant's behalf to do anything along that in the nature of that.
Just on that specific point, Mr. Chair, I believe, as I recall, the conditions that we proposed included some language, saying something to the effect of, to the extent feasible, there would be attempts made to recreate the conditions of the Shipman Gardens.
Yeah.
I know that some of the plants that were originally proposed for that were in our landscape architect's determination probably not feasible to plant there, just for maintenance purposes, and primarily that has to do with the fact, and there was testimony about this from Martha Lyons in this hearing, that when the garden was originally designed, it was designed for one wealthy homeowner with a full-time garden staff who could maintain this kind of thing. And for the use in association with a residential multifamily housing development, it wouldn't really be feasible to do that.
I mean to interrupt you. I'm not suggesting that. I saw that language. I'm talking about a cataloging of the significance of the gardens and depositing that in the National Register of Female Landscape Architects, or Ms. Lyons spoke about the significance of it, and before it gets altered, to just document that. And I thought that it was really leaning towards some type of documentation of it at the site. So, for anybody who's, walked on the Reserve Channel, there's a sign that says, here's where the Boston Navy Yard was, or the Army base, and something like that. This is the site of the Shipman Gardens. This is who she was. This is the significance of it. Here's a photograph of what it looked like in full bloom. Something, maybe that's in the mansion. Your architectural team has shown a lot of creativity, but I haven't seen anything paying homage to the significance of these gardens. And I happen to believe they are quite significant for lots of reasons. So, and I appreciate the fact that they were designed for one woman to enjoy the unique spot there overlooking the Blue Hills, and that this is a whole different use, but that almost reinforces the importance of somehow capturing that. So the reason for that is I haven't heard anything about that. The applicant hasn't really spoken to that. So I'd like the applicant to consider something along those lines.
I think that's a great suggestion, Mr. Chair, and I don't believe this has come up yet in this hearing, but I can convey to you tonight, if I haven't already. I don't remember if we have. We went to the University of Cornell, and we have obtained the entirety of the Shipman records regarding this garden. We have those archived records from Cornell, so we can certainly use those as a guide to consult as they design the use of the garden. And frankly, the records, I've looked through them myself. They're fascinating. I have a feeling there will be some of those historic planting plans used as decorations in the building. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay. And then lastly, would you be willing to make the gardens open to the public on occasion?
I think we've considered that. We've talked about that. I would need to speak with the Tamposis in a little bit more detail and get back to the board on that. But we've certainly considered that as a way to to work with the historical commission, perhaps with some kind of a plaque, and then some one or two times in a year or something of that nature, where members of the public who are interested in touring the gardens and learning about their significance could come on the site and do that.
Yeah, okay, all right, fair enough. Okay. I don't have any further questions. Unless the members have further questions, I'd like to talk about how we can move this hearing forward. Members? Okay. So I'd like to propose a 1-week extension to the receipt of written testimony from anybody who's interested, but certainly Mr. Schumer on the issues we just discussed, or any other issue, and then Mr. Hill, specifically to give Mr. Hill an opportunity to acknowledge and comment on, to the extent that he's interested on behalf of his clients, the conditions that Mr. Schumer, the applicant, has proposed. I feel like it's necessary to give him some time. I'll extend that invitation to anybody, all interested parties, with the purpose of getting written testimony to the board not later than the close of business 1 week from today, which I think is October 6th, perhaps, October 7th.
I think it's the 6th, Mr. Chair.
October 6th. And then I'd like to propose to the members that we meet the following week for the purpose of beginning deliberations on the hearing, to discuss the application on its merits, to discuss the waivers that have been received and the conditions on the waivers, or the board's feeling on the waivers, as well as the conditions that have been proposed. And then we would meet thereafter for the purpose of deliberating the application on the merits. I think the real challenge here is to surface the conditions that have been recommended, and to work and to try to get down to a common document with which we're working. So I'd like to recommend or ask the people that have submitted conditions to the board to get them to us in a Word document that's more easily manipulated than we have today, because I see the merit in both sets of conditions, and I see some overlapping language that really speak to the same thing. I mean, the people who are in this hearing, this is not their first hearing, and that's obvious.
Chair,
Ms. Barrett, yes.
would it be helpful to the board if, once those comments, so suggested conditions and so forth are all in, would it be helpful to you if I tried to put together a single document that sort of integrates that content so that you can see the conditions, including those which may be sort of duplicative or related? You can sort of put a box around them and say, these seem to address the same thing, or these are in conflict, just to maybe try to focus in on where there seems to be some agreement in what the conditions should be versus things that you kind of need to make a decision whether you're going to go one way or another.
Yes, it would be. It would be particularly helpful if you were able to do that in 1 week's time, so that we had some time to look at it.
Yeah, no, if everything's going to be in by next Wednesday, then I don't see why I can't turn that around by Friday.
Okay. So let me put to the members that we do something like that, and then reconvene on the 13th at 7 o'clock in open session for the purpose of debating the merits of the application. I'll open that up to the members.
Chairman, that sounds like a reasonable and logical approach to taming this monster. If I may ask Ms. Barrett a quick question, though, relative to, if you will, the comparison document. Ms. Barrett, are you, what I heard you say is almost putting together a document with 3 columns, or 4, whatever it is.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it would compare the proposals from the proponents and opponents, and then
And the third column might be the suggested language from that's a consensus version of myself, the planning director, and the peer review consultants. Because I think we have some things to suggest that have not come up from either party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when I hear that, I'm not considering that to be testimony, but recommendations to the board for the purposes of furthering and informing our deliberations.
Right.
Okay. That's acceptable. That works. Ms. Jaffer?
Yeah, the plan sounds good to me.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien?
Nothing further at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Further business for the board tonight?
I think the
I'm sorry, Judy.
I
We have
think
an
I would
attendee.
request is that even if you have until next Wednesday, the sooner you can get that content in, the better. Because trying to pull this consensus document together is going to take a bit of effort. Just a courtesy request.
Yeah. Fair point. Mr. Schomer, is that schedule acceptable to you, to the applicant?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. I think just to clarify, the intent of the board is to keep the hearing open just for additional comments from Attorney Hill and anyone else regarding proposed conditions, just in case there's need to take additional testimony.
Yeah, we would also accept additional language, additional reply from you on the matters we discussed tonight, to the extent that you wanted to supplement your hearing to be fair. Close the evidentiary portion of the hearing on the 6th of October and pick up the deliberative process in open session at 7 o'clock on October 13th. At which
That's agreeable.
we will debate the merits of the application in open session in accordance with the open meeting law.
Mr. Chairman, by way of further clarification, do we need to meet on the 6th in order to formally close the hearing, or simply formally close the deliberative, the evidentiary portion of the hearing, or we just simply announce? I want to make sure we cross our T's, dot our I's.
I'm going to, we're going to put people on notice that we're not going to be accepting testimony after the 6th, and then I'll close the evidentiary portion of the hearing on the 13th, effective as of the 6th. We'll do something like that. Okay? Does that work for you?
Yeah, I just want to know where I need to be on
No.
the 6th.
The 6th, you got to have it all the writing's got to be in. I need a writing from Mr. Schomer on the acceptability of that, because that's going to extend over the 180-day deadline.
Understood. We're agreeable
Okay.
to that.
So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, for purposes of the decision, because I have to say when the board closed the hearing. And the
Yeah.
party B, you can say whatever you want about closing for evidence versus something else, but the hearing has a closing date. Is that
Yeah.
going to be the 6th or the 13th?
That, why don't we make that the 13th?
Okay.
At which point we'll, well, look, just to make it clear, we'll close the evidence on the 13th. We'll ask people to get the information to us by the 6th, and we'll try to have that as a hard deadline. But to your point, if that's going to be easier, we'll close the only reason I don't want to meet on the 6th is it's been my experience that we get a lot of material on the date of the hearing. We simply just don't have time to read it. And we're not going to be able to have a fair conversation about this unless we have time to look at the materials that are being provided. It's as simple as that, you know?
That's why I'm asking
Yeah.
the sooner the better,
Yeah.
because if everything comes in at 4 o'clock on the 6th, I can just assure you, I am only human, and you probably won't see that consolidated document from me until Friday morning, Friday morning, the 8th. So just too much to pull together. I can be working on it now, but
Yeah, I understand.
okay,
We'll pick it up on the 13th.
okay.
And then we'll, Mr. Schomer will be asking for your confirmation that the decision will be due. Is it 40 days from that
40
date?
40 days from the date that the hearing closes, yes.
And the board will continue to meet for as long as it's necessary to debate those conditions
But not in a hearing. It's just a
Yeah,
meeting for
that's right.
deliberation. Okay,
for the purpose of debating the merits of the application.
okay.
Further business for the members?
We have one attendee with his hand up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, who is that?
That is Bob Wright.
Okay, Mr. Wright.
Who just took his hand down. So,
No, we're happy
Joe
to
Tim-
hear from him.
okay. Oh, it's back up again.
Mr. Wright?
Oh, it's not available because it's, oh, wait a minute. I gotta promote him for this.
Mr. Wright?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. I was not on at the beginning of the meeting. I couldn't make it, but I'm assuming you're taking comments tonight.
We weren't going to, I mean, but now that you've been recognized, we're happy to take your comment.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to comment on, there are attorneys mentioned about Milton wrestling with the past regarding auto dependency. And, some of this stuff is not going to be anything you haven't heard already, but, the fact is there is zero option for anything other than auto dependency here at this site. Increasing housing in this manner, in this location is not the solution. And again, everyone has said, we're not opposed to having something here, but the density is just too great. And, having the Tim Posey's asked their attorney to be a salesman on this or positioning this site, that's a good solution to solve for the auto dependency issues in the area south of Boston. And he mentioned Boston. It's just ridiculous. He wants to solve, or is he asking you guys, the board, to solve for auto dependency for the entire region under the guise of 40B? Do we, if they want to really solve for auto dependency in a manner that he's suggesting, making areas more dense, they should just take all parking away. Take all parking away and force those residents to rely on public transportation. That would be a solution. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that here, but just the sell job on this is a little ridiculous, I feel. And there are certainly history issues everywhere in this town, in many other towns, in Boston as well. But approving this site at this, at this density is not going to solve the auto dependency issues for the region. It's just too big. And, the other comment I heard was that, they appreciate the comments from the neighbors, and that's, all well and good. But I just don't think that they care about the issues and the comments from the neighbors. They say they do, but, they've been through these hearings with, a lack of or inadequate construction management plans. There have been extended hearings. There have been limited changes to the density, considering how inflated it was as a starting point. If they did care, the density would not be what it currently is. And, they can say the design is great. Mr. Tambosi said the design was great, but it can certainly exist. That design can exist with fewer units. They're just unwilling to budge because of the economics, and we've heard that. And that's what it comes down to, is they care about the economics. They do not care about the neighborhood. They don't care about the community, the safety. They don't care about the history. They're not even going to care about the residents who live there. All they care about is the economics, and that's why the density is what it is. And it's not something more reduced. And that's just my opinion. I appreciate your allowing me time to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Okay. Any other?
Mr. Giamposi.
Or Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, clarify so we know who from our team should be attending. Do you expect verbal testimony at the meetings on the 6th and the 13th, or what is?
No.
Okay.
No, we'll be deliberating the merits of the application, but obviously it's open to anybody who wishes to attend, and your full team at your discretion is invited.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other comments from the members tonight? Okay, so we'll recess this hearing until October 13th, at which time we'll begin deliberation of the application. We'll ask the the applicant, the council to the neighborhood association and any other interested parties to submit comments to the board on this application, not later than the close of business on the 6th, for the purposes of compiling the testimony and beginning the deliberative process on the 13th. The hearing will stand in recess until October 13th at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chair.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Bye now.
Good night.